Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we are moving on with our character and starting to model the clothes. There are several different approaches to modeling clothes that we can take. I'll try to show you a couple different ones, starting with the top. So I'm going to start by just selecting a bunch of faces on the upper half of her body that I will be duplicating to act as the base for her shirt. Once I've selected all the faces that I want as my starting point for the top, I will go up to here and select duplicate. And then I'll start tweaking the local translate Z so that we can get a little thickness to these clothes. We want it to hover just above her skin. I'm also going to go back and compare it to the original model sheet so that I can try and get it as close as possible to the original design. Now that I've got my base for the top, I can go in and start adjusting the vertices and smoothing them so that it doesn't look like it's clinging so tightly to her. If your model, for whatever reason, turns bright green, that's okay. It just means that there is an error where it is trying to reference an invalid material on your model, which can be fixed by reassigning the default Lambert material. So right here, I am going through and selecting all of my vertices around the collar, and I am averaging them out and just trying to get a smooth shape so that I can then come in and select all these edges and extrude them inward once so I can get a nice clean loop of faces around the collar. Although I don't go for that same smooth loop of faces in the armholes, I am still trying to get a nice circular shape going rather than these jagged faces going in and out. And then for a while here, I am just going through and meticulously adjusting my vertices to try and smooth out the shapes, get it to look a bit more like the model sheet, while also making decisions to make it look good in 3D as well, since now we're getting to the point where we need to be really considering what the final design will look like rather than just making it look like the model sheet. And then here I start raising the vertices to build up that collar around her neck, while also being careful to smooth out my work so that it's a clean transition into that collar. And then once I am in a pretty good spot, I'm going to extend the bottom of the shirt down to finish off the rest of the shape. So going back here, I make a couple of extrusions from the edges to finish off the back and make a nice closed loop for me to extend. So then with all of my edges selected, I'm going to use the extrude tool to extrude all the way down to the bottom of where I want the shirt to go. And then before clicking anywhere else, while this little menu is still up, I'm going to add more divisions to my extrusion to get it to be roughly even as the rest of the shirt is just before this part. And then once I have my extrusion, I'm going to select vertices with my soft select tool turned on by pressing B so I can make big sweeping changes to all these vertices. And then I'm going to come back and smooth them all out with the average vertices tool and my quad draw tool. And then for finishing off the front, I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to select the ends of the front and the sides. I'm going to hit bridge. And then with my insert edge loop tool, I have that selected and go to my tool settings. I'm going to use relative distance from edge. I'm going to have insert edge flow checked. And I'm going to start inserting edges. What that does with insert with edge flow is it will modify the curve of my geometry as I'm adding edges, so I don't have to make that curve myself. Then once I've finished this part off, I can start to fill in the middle with extrusions and bridges and the weld vertices tool. And then from that point, I go through and start adjusting the length of this shirt from all the different angles to find what is sort of the best curve going from the front to the back. It's at this point that I discover that there is a bit of a discrepancy between the length of the shirt in some of the different views. So this is where I start going back and forth and making decisions on my own in the 3D view and just trying to find that compromise with the different views from the 2D model sheets. And then finally, I couldn't forget about this split in the back of the shirt. So I've been moving along and I've decided that I want to have sort of a physical collar here more than just the texture. So I'm going to need to do a little retopo on this. And then I'm going to merge my retopology with the original mesh. So what I do is I make my shirt live, and as we have done before, using my quad draw, I start to add polygons around the collar. And then once I've got a loop of them, I stretch out all the faces to the edge of the collar. And then I start adding edge loops to the middle while still in quad draw, so they follow the shape of my shaped collar. So now with my new collar shape, I can go ahead and extrude these out. And now I've got a collar shape that is distinct from the rest of the shirt. Then after I've made my extrusion, I'm careful to go to the back side and delete all of these faces that I don't want. And then same thing, moving to the original shirt, I go through and delete all the faces where I am going to merge it with my new collar. And then from there, I'm going to combine my collar with my shirt. And then using my bridge tool and my target weld tool, I'm going to connect them both together. Next, we want to give our clothes the appearance of thickness so that they don't look like they are just paper thin. So to do that, we are going to select our edge loops on the collar and extrude inwards. Same thing with the armholes. You just want to select all those edges and then extrude inwards. After you make your extrusions, it's a good idea to use your X-ray to inspect the inside and make little adjustments so it's all even on the inside. If, for example, you were working on a character that had a sleeve like this, it's not necessarily Supposed to be right up against the skin. What you want to do is make an extrusion in, and then you do it again and pull the geometry back. You might do an offset like this, so we can kind of see the inside of that fabric. And then it kind of pinches at the end there, so the last thing you'd want to do is add a fence there, so that our geometry does not smooth out so much. Next up, for the inside of the bottom, because there is so much more of the inside showing, I'm going to select all these faces and I'm going to duplicate them, kind of like what I did to create the shirt, but I'm going to duplicate them, and then the new faces I'm going to bring inwards to act as the back face. And then I'm going to go to face mode, select all of these faces. I'm going to go to mesh display. In the normals category, I'm going to hit reverse. And that reverses the normals of all the faces. If you want to think of the normals as like the skin, then of the mesh, then it basically inverted the skin. And then with each of these selected, I'm going to hit combine. And it made it disappear because I have my isolate select on. So I'm going to undo that. And there we go. And select all these faces again. Do a little adjustment before I'm finished. Let's come back up a bit. And I'm going to double click to select this entire edge loop. Double click here to select that edge loop. I'm going to hit bridge. And now the bottom of the shirt also appears to have some thickness. And then, like with the example with the cuff I showed you earlier, I'm going to start adding edge loops with my multi-cut tool. I'm going to add these very, very close to the edges so that when I subdivide with my smooth preview, the density of the geometry will maintain the sharp corners that I want. Finally, coming back up here, my new color seems to be disappearing a bit in my smooth preview. So I'm going to come back in here, select all of those edges along here, and I'm going to bevel them. Make sure there's a chamfer. I'm going to make sure to grab these edges on the insides as well. Great. With that, I've got a nice hard edge for my collar. Then right here, it seems to smooth out that nice corner I want. So I'm going to grab these edges. I'm going to hit bevel. Chamfer is off. Give a very small fraction. And then from there, I go on and just clean up these vertices and get rid of any end-cons. Next, I'll move on to the bracers. Kind of like what we did for the shirt, I'm going to select a bunch of faces and I'm going to duplicate those to act as my base. But in this instance, I'm not going to mess with my translation because I want to use the quad draw to adjust these vertices before I give them any thickness. It takes me a little while to find the shape I want, but eventually I settle on deleting all of the faces in the middle of the bracer and just really defining the faces at the top and the bottom. And then I come back and fill it in afterwards. And then once it's time to add some thickness with the extrude tool, it really helps me out that I defined the top and the bottom so cleanly, because then those edge loops are really clean when I go to those top and bottom portions and extrude again to give those parts some extra definition. And then peeking inside, I select all these faces on the inside that I don't want, leaving a ring on the top and the bottom just for a little security. But all these faces I'm selecting here, I'm going to delete because no one will ever see these. Then, like we've been doing before, I'm going to select all these corners and use the bevel tool to add some additional geometry right up to the edges so that when we use the smooth preview, they do not collapse in on themselves. And then finally, in my design, I have just a little gemstone embedded in the bracers, so I'm going to model that out real quickly. And then I'm just going to move this into position, extend the edges inwards, and combine the object with the bracer itself. Although it's not technically her clothes, this would also be a good opportunity to give her eyebrows. And in the last video, we ended up shrinking the head, and I said that I might regret it. And lo and behold, I do regret it, because now my face does not match up with the reference. So I'm going to have to sort of eyeball these eyebrows, so to speak. So I am going to select my body and make my body live. I'm going to go to quad draw, and I'm going to sort of approximate how I want these eyebrows to be. And plan out all my vertices. Zoom out. It's not quite the same shape, but I can work with it. And I'm going to hide my reference layer because now it's going to get in the way. I'm going to start putting in these polygons. And because I don't really have the reference to work from, I'm going to use just my instincts on this. And I think I'll actually replace these corners and extrude out the tip so that this edge loop in the middle extends through the whole thing. Give it some more geometry because we want these eyebrows to be very flexible, because as she's emoting, different portions of the eyebrow could raise or lower with her expressions. So we want this to have enough geometry to still look smooth as it is deforming. Back, check my reference. And those eyebrows look like they could be a bit larger. You want to be conscious of how your eyebrows are shaped, because it can be really easy to sort of bake an expression into your character. But ideally, you want your character to have as neutral of an expression as possible so that you're not fighting against that sort of baked in expression as you're animating. So that's why I really don't want like a big smile on our character. We don't want our eyebrows to have any sort of excessively emotive shape in the default pose. And we hit Q to exit my quadra. We go to vertices, select them all, and just try to slide them down a little bit more. That's right on that brow line. And there we go. The last part, I'm going to select all these faces, extrude. Obviously, we don't want too much, but we want just enough. So you can really see them. And then I would even select the faces on the inside. Extrude in just a little bit, just so they go inside the surface of the skin. And then delete those faces. And delete this edge. And then you've got some eyebrows. Then moving on to the pants, these for my character are perhaps one of the easiest parts to work on. I'm going to select all these faces and duplicate them like I did with the shirt and give them a little bit of thickness, but not quite as much as I did with the shirt. Then I come in and adjust the areas around the knees, try to give them a bit of a fold. And I just adjust some of the vertices around the ankle to try and make it look like the pants are sort of tucked into the boot. And then I move up here and start smoothing things out and giving ourselves more space between the legs so that there's more room to move and it's not quite so tight. And as we did with the shirt, we are going to extrude inwards to give ourselves some thickness at the top of the pants. And add an extra edge loop to the bottom of the cuffs so that they don't collapse in on themselves. And then finally, we are ready to move on to the boot. So like we've done before, I'm going to select all these faces and duplicate them. And then I'm just going to select these ones on the bottom of the foot and I'm going to slide them up. And then I'm going to select all of these faces on the bottom of the foot and I'm going to extrude them back down again. So that I have this nice loop of faces that I can extrude to make the thickness of my sole. But before I can do that, I need to go through one more time and select some of these faces and flatten them out. Making sure to extrude these faces in the back so that I have a nice heel. And moving these edge loops around so that I have a nice smooth transition from the corner of the heel to the ball of the foot. And then I'm going through and just sort of refining the shape of that bottom of the shoe. Here I start adding more geometry close to the edges as well, just to make sure they don't collapse in on themselves. And then I go through here and repeat a lot of the same steps as I extrude out this steel toe. And then finally I get to this sort of wing I have on the side of the boot, where here I've decided to make the boot live. And I start drawing out quads to make the part of the wing that is connected to the boot. And then once I've taken as far as I can, I go in and extrude out that shape, and I start shaping it out away from the boot before extruding out the tip of the wing to its full length. And similar to how I reattached my remodeled collar, I go through and start deleting faces on the wing and the boot in preparation to combine them. At which point I use the bridge tool and the target weld tool to reconnect the wing. This ends up being a really painstaking process for me, as the way the wing sort of remerges with the boot is at a really awkward angle. So if you're finding yourself with a huge headache like this and you're just beginning, you might not want to go through the process of painstakingly making a perfect merge like this. Rather, you might want to just leave all the faces intact and deal with having some extra faces that are not being seen. Finally, as I start to reach a point where I'm near completion, I go ahead and go to select, use constraints, and it will give me this menu where I can select all and next. And then I can select different kinds of polygons that I want to isolate on my mesh. So I can find my n-gons or my triangles, and I can weed them out. Just be sure that when you are done with selection constraints that you go back to the top of that little menu and select nothing rather than all and next. That way your selections are not constrained anymore and you can select all of your polygons normally again. And then I go to the top of my boot, give it some thickness, and extrude it inwards. Next, moving on to the belt, I'm going to create a cylinder and scale it in to get it very approximate to what I want the belt shape to look like. I'm going to delete the faces on the top and bottom of the cylinder too. And then I'm going to make my shirts live. I'm going to grab my belt, follow the vertices, and just scale them in a little bit. And they snap to my surface. Now I can slide these up, get it just right. And then with that, add in an edge loop. Switch to faces, select them all. Turn off Make Live. And extrude out my belt. And then for the belt buckle, I go ahead and select some faces from my belt, and I go ahead and duplicate those. And then from there, I model out the rest of the belt buckle using all the techniques I've used thus far in the video. And there is my belt. From this point on, the video is me just modeling out this knife on our waist. There's nothing here that we haven't done already, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly without much commentary, as we spent plenty of time modeling a weapon in our last assignment. So if you're curious to watch me take this from start to finish, sit tight. Otherwise, go ahead and skip to the end of the video. Now that these are finished, I'm going to slide them in and line them up with the belt. And I'm going to hit Control G to put them in a group. By default, when you make a group, the pivot will be at the world origin, which is the very center of the grid. Hit this button up here to center the pivot on my knife, and then I'll rotate it like so. Going back to my reference to get it just right. And like that, her clothes are complete. And now her clothes are complete. With that, there are only a few more finishing touches we need to take care of, and then we can UV mapper and take her into Substance Painter. But until then, thank you for sticking around, and have a good day.